Welcome to Planetterrian Daily, episode 52. It's April 29th, 2026. Let's see what the latest research is telling us. A blood test using artificial intelligence models is showing early promise for monitoring a rare childhood bone and soft tissue cancer. Researchers have developed a liquid biopsy test that uses artificial intelligence to detect molecular signals of this rare cancer that mainly affects children and adolescents. The approach provides a less invasive alternative to traditional imaging or tissue biopsy, which can be especially burdensome for young patients already facing treatment. According to the report in Fierce Biotech, the test could help track disease progression and spot signs of relapse or treatment response earlier than current methods allow. What makes this particularly interesting is how the machine learning models are trained to identify subtle patterns in blood samples that human analysts might overlook. If the technology holds up in larger validation studies, it could reduce the need for frequent hospital visits and lower the overall physical strain on these kids. This is still early promise rather than a finished tool, but it shows how combining diagnostics with artificial intelligence might change the monitoring landscape in pediatric oncology. While that story highlights how technology can ease the burden on young patients, today's news also touches on weight management challenges that many adults face after stopping certain medications. A simple outpatient endoscopic procedure already in use for type 2 diabetes patients in Europe helped individuals retain most of their weight loss after discontinuing Eli Lilly's tirzepatide. The study published in Fierce Biotech positions this technique as a potential bridge strategy for people who must stop glucagon like peptide-1 receptor agonist medications. Rather than seeing rapid rebound, the participants maintained the majority of their metabolic improvements even after the drug was no longer part of their regimen. The procedure itself is minimally invasive and performed on an outpatient basis, which makes it an interesting non-drug intervention in the broader conversation about sustained metabolic health. It is worth noting that this builds on an existing technique rather than introducing an entirely new technology, which could mean faster adoption if further trials confirm the benefits. For patients worried about long-term dependence on these medications, the finding offers a practical physiological option worth watching closely. Staying with interventions that aim to produce lasting change, a major gene editing trial just delivered results that could reshape how we think about one-time treatments. Intellia Therapeutics reported that its in vivo CRISPR-based therapy, lonvoguron-ziclimerin, met the primary endpoint in a pivotal phase 3 clinical trial. The company has now begun a rolling submission to the Food and Drug Administration, advancing the prospect of one-time gene editing treatments delivered directly inside the body. Unlike approaches that require removing cells, editing them in a lab, and returning them, this therapy works in vivo, which simplifies the entire process considerably. The results are being described as compelling, and they represent meaningful progress for CRISPR technologies that avoid the complexities of ex vivo cell manipulation. If approved, this would be an important step toward making precise genetic corrections more accessible and scalable for certain genetic conditions. From precise molecular tools inside the body, we shift to the larger environmental cost of building those very technologies. Mining for lithium, cobalt, and other critical minerals needed for green energy and digital devices is creating severe, largely untracked environmental and health impacts. These harms fall disproportionately on the world's most vulnerable communities, according to a new report from the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. The report draws clear parallels to historical patterns of resource extraction and warns that current practices risk repeating past injustices on an even larger scale. Scientists are calling for improved tracking systems, better accountability mechanisms, and greater recognition of how these supply chains affect public health in affected regions. The findings remind us that the push for better health technologies can sometimes create new inequities far from the laboratories where those innovations are developed. The same drive for better health technologies can sometimes create new inequities closer to home. A new report tracks both progress and fragility in United States health equity. A report released this week documents measurable successes in reducing health disparities across United States states between 2022 and 2024. Experts caution, however, that recent policy shifts could reverse those fragile gains in a relatively short period of time. The improvements were real and quantifiable, yet they appear vulnerable to changes in funding priorities and public health infrastructure. This highlights the importance of sustained attention beyond short-term wins if we want health equity gains to become lasting ones. Policy decisions also shape how conditions like autism are understood and supported at the federal level. A restructured Federal Advisory Committee on Autism held its first meeting after most scientific experts were replaced with activists and advocates. The group directed significant attention toward the concept of profound autism, which describes individuals needing substantial lifelong support with communication, daily living skills, and often co-occurring intellectual disability. This shift marks a notable change in how federal priorities for autism research and support services may be determined going forward. You've probably heard recent discussions frame profound autism as a brand new diagnostic category that neatly separates severe cases from everyone else on the spectrum. That framing is misleading because the term is not a formal clinical diagnosis in major manuals like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5. Instead, it functions as a descriptive concept meant to highlight people who require extensive ongoing assistance and who may have minimal spoken language. Right now, as you listen, roughly 1 in 3 autistic people meet criteria that would fall under this umbrella, according to recent prevalence estimates. Yet the boundary between profound and other levels remains fuzzy because autism traits exist on overlapping continua rather than clean boxes. One memorable number from longitudinal research shows that about 30 to 40% of autistic children have co-occurring intellectual disability, and that figure has remained relatively stable even as overall autism identification has risen. The next time you encounter headlines about autism policy, remember that support needs can change across a lifetime and are influenced by environment, co-occurring conditions, and access to communication tools. A practical takeaway is to focus less on the label itself and more on individualized assessments that ask what specific communication, sensory, and daily living supports a person actually needs. Watch for research that tracks functional outcomes over decades instead of cross-sectional snapshots because those longitudinal findings tend to reveal far more about what helps people thrive. Before we go, keep an eye on how these policy conversations around autism and health equity continue to evolve as new data emerges next week. That covers today's science and health news. Share this with someone who's curious about the latest research. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. See you next time. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.